Lauren, I believe you've got a very interesting topic for us this week.
Yeah, I think that for those of us who have been lifelong genre fans, there's something that's happening in the last 10 years, or rather, not happening in the last 10 years, that's kind of fascinating. And at the same time, it kind of speaks to maybe some hope, but at the same time, some fear about the future. When I grew up watching Universal monster movies and the Hammer monster movies, and those were series. We talked a little bit before about whether there was sequels before Exorcist 2. Well, there certainly was. There was entire franchises that ran through decades, often broaching a second decade throughout the genre's history. And if you want to look at the Godzilla films, which I consider monster films part of the horror genre, that's an unbroken chain for God. How long? Longer than I've been alive. So obviously we get to the 70s and we start to see sequels pop up more regularly, whether we're talking about the Omen films or whatever. And then the 80s, obviously the floodgates open. Same thing once the Scream wave begins with the 90s. But in the last 10 years, we've seen remarkably few long-running franchises come to life. Now, yes, there is the Conjuring universe, and there is Insidious. But you're hard-pressed to find any great number of new iconic franchises that are growing in the current environment. Maybe this is in part because companies like A24 are producing standalone films that are really strong, but don't lend themselves to sequelization. Not that that's ever stopped Hollywood before, i.e. we really need a Pet Sematary Part 2 or the just announced Pet Sematary prequel that they're making.
I heard about that.
The world heard about that, and we all had the same reaction.
It all takes place from the point of view of Church the Cat.
It's a Judd. It's a Judd. Yeah, it's a Judd story.
Yeah.
But it's interesting to me because in a way I'd prefer this, because I think long-running franchises inevitably kind of become self-fulfilling to the genre, right? They become rote and normal and ineffectual, and then everyone focuses on them and nothing else happens. And then the genre goes through a low period. So if we can avoid that, that's great. But on the other hand, it also speaks to the fact that although horror is more popular today than it's ever been, with the most popular shows on television and the most popular comic books, and obviously films coming out and making more money in the genre than they ever have before, it's event culture, which event culture, while popular, can feel very empty. And it's probably a pretty bad mismatch to this genre that I love so much and so many of you love so much. So why aren't we, looking at the Babadook Part 4 coming out in April? Because if it was the 80s or even the 90s, that would be happening. Or where's Hush Part 3 or Hush Part 2 for that matter? These are films that do seem to be open to the idea of sequels, at least in the same way that Candyman or, Friday the 13th were open for sequels after first films that didn't obviously lead to where the sequels went. I think really the answer to this, to answer my own question, although I won't pretend that I can put any veracity to my answer, is that I think that we have too many choices out there to spend too much time on any one thing. There's hundreds of streaming services now, literally hundreds of streaming services, both free and pay, and they have millions of choices. You can dial up anything at any time, pretty much, if you're willing to pay that bill. Video games put you behind into the director's chair and let you control the action and give you a more immediate reaction. It's easy to lose a couple hours playing a Mortal Kombat game where you get to play Rambo, right? YouTube has 500 hours of video uploaded every minute. Is it really any wonder why we can't find that next big franchise? And maybe we shouldn't even want the next franchise to be going for another 15, 20 years. Maybe that's not what I'm arguing for. But I think, in a way, we tend to focus on those big event films and those big event releases. And I think the genre itself is kind of antithetical to that. It's always been the underdog genre, barely respected by the mainstream and always kind of chiseling away at the edges of normal, polite society. I think horror works best as social criticism, even when it's not trying to be social criticism. So why is horror both at its highest point and lowest point, and why don't things run long anymore? I do think it's about choices, and that's a great problem to have. But it might be a problem that bites us in the ass just as much as those long-running franchises do, because unless at some point we, as a community, decide to have something to champion, we may end up with nothing to champion. What do you guys think?
Well, I also,
oh,
I'm
go
sorry,
ahead.
Jimmy.
No,
it okay?
you go. You go.
I also think that too, Lauren, that along with all the many hundreds of choices that we have with the streaming and all of that, versus when we only had cable or the video store with very small selective choices. I think as far as the horror genre is concerned, I think the fact that back in those days, because we didn't have so much social media exposure to horror, I think that the horror we saw in films, it kind of it could evoke more emotion in us, evoke more conversation, trip you out a little bit more. But now, okay, you can go onto YouTube, see, or not YouTube, but you can go onto the internet and see a real beheading. You can watch the news and hear about such and such. Like, I grew up in Cleveland, about those girls who were locked in that basement on the west side.
Uh-huh.
You know what I mean? You see so much real horror exposed in media, and we're getting these images 24/7, that I think by the time you go back to a horror film, I think we're just, maybe I'm talking about something different, but it feels like we're desensitized to it, that the film almost is ineffective at what it's trying to do, because I'm too horrified by what I'm already exposed to in real life. You know what I mean? With just the news and everything. I mean, even, I'm not going to go there. But anyway, we're seeing a lot of horrific stuff on the news every single day, and all sorts of outlets for it. It's not like when we just had that one Faces of Death video and up in the corner of the video store. Now we got Faces of Death 24,000 different ways.
Yeah.
So I think maybe that's hurting the genre.
And I'll second that, Monty, because I mean, my mother is scared. The news scares my mother to death when it comes to all this COVID stuff, because all the news is scare you to death with COVID. New strain, mutated strain, vaccine resistant strain. It's coming for you. You're going to die. You're dead. You know what I mean? Now make sure you don't change off the channel when we come back. More death. Stay here. More death. It's just like, she's scared to death to even like step foot outside the house. And I have to tell her, stop watching the news.
Yep.
Just stop.
Yep.
I try to do the same with my mom, but it's like a drug. This 24-hour news cycle is probably one of the worst things that's happened to us as a society, because now that they're, they got to drive those ratings. So they got to be more extreme. This company's got to be more extreme than the other company, which has to be more extreme. And then they have to have villains and good guys, and they've created their own genre of bullshit. Really, and it's horrifying. They're exploiting things for ratings, and they're scaring people. That I think it's the older people that are really more affected by this, because they were raised to trust the news media. That these people are telling you the truth, and they have your best interest in mind, and they don't understand the whole ratings game and the fact that they just want to keep eyeballs on screen, and they really don't give a shit how it affects you.
Right.
And again, throw back to they're more worried about video games and movies when they should be worried about the crap that's being put out on television in the form of news. A lot of these things aren't even news. They're just opinion shows masquerading as news. That's even the worst part.
Yep.
I mean, there's no more Walter Cronkite that you could, and that's the way it is. You know what I mean? Because he was an actual journalist that had a little bit of credibility. A lot of these people are just opinion shows. They got personalities, and they're selling their brand, and they don't really care what damage they do. And it's on every channel. It's not just one network. All right, I'm not going to point out just one network. It's every network.
Mm-hmm.
And it's all horrible. And I decided last year, it was within the last couple of years, just to unplug from all that shit. And I feel a lot better. Yeah. I feel a lot better about it, because it's just overwhelming, just the stuff they beat you over the head with. And they try to create this echo chamber and that echo chamber. And they talk about a lot of the divisiveness going on in this country. I blame the media as much as anybody else.
Me too.
Because it's on TV every day. It's like, oh, well, if you think this way, then you're this type of person. And and we shouldn't like these type of people. And what the hell is going on here? I mean, we're all humans. Thinking differently is a healthy thing. Having conversations and learning from each other and being individuals is good. But if you listen to the news media, they'll tell you it's bad and that you're bad, and this is why, because you're not. So that is more horrifying to me than any movie I could ever watch.
I think that this really brings They Live to light. They Live is so poignant right now, I think, because to me that encapsulates. That's not the right word, is it?
Encaps.
We got you, Jamie.
Encapsulate.
Say it
Yes,
fast
thank
so
you.
nobody knows that you're saying
Yeah. Pretend
keep
like you know what
going.
you're talking about.
This movie cap. This movie
Never
cap-
back down. Keep going.
Okay.
Yeah.
So, I mean, it basically encompasses, how about that?
There you
I'm like Porky Pig now. It seems to be like very poignant for our times right now. I think people need to watch that movie. I think people need to watch that movie and start learning lessons in themselves, you know. Also, this brings to mind Hellfest for me, because I think Hellfest is like a good example of kids aren't afraid, you know, they're not afraid. They go to the Knott's Berry Scary Farm or whatever. They go down to, Universal Horror Nights or whatever, and they're not afraid because they know it's all fake. But then you bring in this element of the serial killer who takes advantage of that. That's the kind of thing that we need today. We need to find out what scares people and then make movies using that fear. I think that's why Hellfest is so genius, because they've tapped into this idea of the youth being so blind to risk and not being very good at assessing risk. So I think that right now it's kind of important that we kind of push this idea a little bit. Maybe we need some creative people out there looking at society and finding out what people really truly fear, and then using that for inspiration.
That's what had always been the center of the genre.
Mhm.
And that's why I said earlier that I introduced the idea that I like when horror serves as social criticism, even when it doesn't try to.
Right.
And by the way, I completely see what you did there. You're trying to butter me up after our Exorcist 2 argument by bringing up Hellfest. I see what you did.
No, I am not like that.
But yeah, no, I think it's important that Monty brought up a great explanation of the landscape of media right now and the ultra violence that's pervasively available, the real ultra violence. But that is really ripe material for horror to riff off of. In the past, we always looked at it and as for inspiration. Now it seems like, again, looking for event horror and the thing that's going to hit 4 quadrants. The Conjuring, right?
Right.
None of us are afraid of anything in The Conjuring, but they'll make a loud sound and something will move fast and someone in scary makeup will be hiding in a corner, right? So, and that's where we're at with the entertainment sphere. And rather than really having some social criticism or talking about what all the anxiety that's hanging in the air over us all every day anyway, which is what the genre always did.
I think Hereditary is excellent because it does go into that a little bit. The fear in that is your fear of your own family history, the fear of passed down mental illness, passed down sicknesses. I thought that was quite genius. So that's tapping into a fear that's actually pretty poignant. I think that everybody kind of has that fear, oh, my family has this in it. Oh my gosh, am I going to get it? Or, oh, my uncle over here is like, he's got mental illness. Does that mean that my kid will get it, or my dad will get it, or I'll get it? I mean, we need to find out. I mean, I know what scares me. I'm scared right now. I think I'm scared of influence. So I'm scared of people influencing people and taking advantage of ignorance. So I think that a lot of movies right now would be great if they were coming out with movies like They Live, because that taps right into that. So
and I'm also afraid of people allowing themselves to be influenced so that they can feel like they fit into a crowd.
Right.
Because nobody wants to be ostracized.
Exactly.
So whether they
gotta-
believe it or not, they'll go along with a narrative just because they want to feel like they belong and they don't want to be singled out. So there's a lot of that going on too.
There's a lot of that going on, and especially with young people. Especially with young people these days. Yeah.
Nobody's just second that, Mike. What I was gonna say is there's nobody's an individual anymore. I think all of us as horror fans on this panel, we can go back to probably how we were when we were kids. The only one talking about, at least I remember being in the cafeteria, the only one talking about Friday the 13th Part 2 and Silent Night, Deadly Night. That's why I go on YouTube now and I see kids that are like 8 and 10 talking about Silent Night, Deadly Night, and it's cool. I'm like, oh, it wasn't cool in 1989. But we all know what it's like, us on this panel, to be ostracized and individuals. So at least we know.
But used to be like, we used to wear it like a badge of honor.
Yeah.
And now it's like a source of fear.
Yeah.
And I don't understand that. It's like, no, be yourself, be proud to be yourself. I mean, be the voice of opposition when there needs to be one. And don't allow yourself to be scared in submission, because that's when bad things happen, when people just go along with the mob.
Yeah, when
it's like a Black Sabbath lyric from Mob Rules. When you listen to fools, the mob rules.
Yep.
Mike,
you gotta be the one to stand up
I
and
was
say
going
bullshit.
right there, man. I was about to say when folk music started to become something that everyone just clamored towards the center on, we needed Black Sabbath, and when Journey were ruling the radio, we needed the Pistols.
Yeah.
And that's kind of where we're at. We need people to go back to some sense of identity and originality.
Yeah.
And now those genres you used to be able to count on to be those counterculture voices have all joined in.
Yep.
Yeah.
Right.
They've been absorbed into the narrative, and now there is nobody calling bullshit.
Right.
And that's what we really need, whether it be a movie or a band or something. We need somebody to take the lead, Whether you agree with him or not, one of the most punk rock things I ever saw was when Johnny Ramone was inducted into the Rock and Roll Hall of Fame. He said, "God bless President Bush and God bless America." He's a punk rocker being accepted. That was the balls on that fucking guy. We need something. We need somebody with those kind of balls to stand up and say, screw this shit. This isn't cool.
We need. I mean, it's so sad that George Carlin's no longer around. But I think if he was around, he'd probably take one look at the landscape and end himself. You know what I mean?
No, he'd be thinking, ooh,
money.
This is a target-rich environment.
Yeah. I think for a Hall of Fame analogy, I think again when the Pistols entered into the Hall of Fame and they refused to show up and they sent a mean letter saying basically "fuck you, we don't want in." We need that. We need that. Like, don't normalize what was important at one time. Don't do it.
Right.
Watch or be punished.